Hi, this will be our last video. We'll be talking a little bit about evaluation and control. And so in this last portion of implementation, there's a number of things that have to be planned ahead of time. And so in your implementation plan, you would want to have a discussion in terms of the measurement itself. And it's important to think in terms of if you want your vision and your mission statement and your values to be reflected in those evaluation processes. And so, this is where you start to think in terms of, the measurement itself, what it is that you want to measure. Are you measuring outputs, inputs, behaviors, a combination of all of those? And, how do those get translated into actual actions by the individual functional departments in the organization, by individuals themselves, and reflected in some annual plans that are followed by a leader somewhere in the organization. So what to measure, what's important to you as an organization to make sure that your strategy is going to be implemented and that all of those other longer term components are also measured on a regular basis. The other component to think about ahead of time is who is going to do that measurement and how you organize structurally for that evaluation systems to occur within the organization. A third part is when to measure, and so there's a lot of philosophy around whether or not how often you should be measuring and providing feedback. And so depending on the type of organizations and your plans, this might be something that needs to occur quite frequently, especially if you're in an industry that is highly volatile. Then you would want to be looking at evaluating where you are on a more frequent basis. Who controls comes back also to how much centralization or decentralization do you want to have on some of your measures. And nowadays there's all kinds of really neat software programs that allow you to put, for example, balanced scorecard, key performance indicators that everybody then takes and inputs a number of actions that they can do within their own job, and then check on progress on centralized systems, but in effect they're self-measuring as they go along, and they're able to provide rationale for goals that haven't been attained or plans that they have going forward directly onto centralized systems. So even though there could be a lot of centralization, in effect the way of applying the measurement might be quite decentralized. What gets noticed now, you're talking about standards and incentives and what you want to recognize, and then it's important ahead of time to decide on exactly what your expectations are in terms of meeting, say for example, quality standards or satisfaction for customers, satisfactions from employees, all those kinds of things, and the incentives that you attach to those in order for your evaluation to end up yielding what you've been wanting it to yield all along. Another component these days is risk management and how that gets, who decides on the level of risk, how that gets measured and doled out essentially to who's responsible throughout the organization. So, these are all the before items that need to be part of your implementation plan to make some decisions as to how you're going to make sure that there's some level of controls to make sure that whatever you've decided you're going to implement is going to be successful. A second part that the book alludes to is the various methods that are being used for measurement, and I won't go into great details here because there's probably a lot more even than what is available in your textbook, but whether they're activity-based costing, where the costs are allocated to each units, various responsibility centers. One things that we do here always in our case analysis is to look at the standard financial performance so that you can take a look to see how much the organization is leveraged, so you can make a decision on whether or not they have the ability to invest, and other factors in terms of how well they are managing their affairs, and whether or not that it opens the doors to making some changes in the way that we allocate our resources going forward. So that's during, in terms of, is this a balanced scorecard approach, and there's all kinds of different ways of viewing how you might actually do your evaluation. The third part and the final part is the actual evaluation, and that occurs really after. And this is where you go back to looking at what gets noticed, and you actually apply some form of whether it's further incentives or celebrations, recognition of achieving your objectives. So at some point in time, you have to take the time to make sure that people are rewarded for going forward, and when there's other actions that need to be taken, maybe because you haven't reached your objectives, that you're able to, that should have been corrected all along, but if there's a change in processes, structuring, or whatnot that needs to occur in order to mitigate some of the problems, then after the fact, there's that evaluation period where you've had a chance to suggest changes for that wheel of change to continue along. And this is where you might also look at benchmarks and see how you're performing against either yourself in past years, or looking at your competitors in the market generally to see how well things are going. So that's it on this topic for now, and wish you a great week again. Thanks, bye-bye.